My third grade teacher taught our class a poem that went, good, better, best. Never let it rest until good becomes better and better becomes best. I grew up here in DC and attended public schools, and I loved it. School was safe, it was nurturing, we learned and we had fun. A lot has changed in the few years since I've been in school, and our kids are dealing with some things that we never could have imagined. Climate change, school shootings, increased levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. Some of our kids are ending their own lives. Many of our kids are hurting. In fact, one study says that 36 million kids in America will face at least one adverse experience before they turn 18. An adverse experience can look like losing a parent to death or incarceration, growing up in a home where there's violence, substance addiction, or an untreated mental illness, or even living in a violent neighborhood. And if a child is one of color or growing up in poverty, they're even more likely to face an adverse experience. This adversity affects our kids' ability to learn. It shows up in schools as disengagement, withdrawal, anger, fights that can become even more violent and result in the loss of life. This is what happened with my 17-year-old brother, Abdullah Coghill. Abdullah and I didn't grow up in the same household. My birth parents separated and divorced and went their separate ways and started new families when I was very young. So I didn't know anything about him until I was an adult. We met through our aunt. I was about 20 and he was about 15 years old. I was nervous about meeting him, but excited at the same time. And when I did, it was love at first sight. He was tall, lean, caramel brown, and fine. That means he was handsome. And he knew it. He had a surplus of charisma that made him popular among the young ladies. Abdullah liked to tinker with electronics, draw, play with the neighborhood kids. We made some great memories together. The last time I saw my brother alive was on a hot DC summer day. We met near the 70 bus stop. I had recently returned from West Africa. We saw each other and exchanged a quick hug and kiss and promised to hook up later so he could hear all about Africa, as he said. And I wanted to tell him, but that day would never come because just a few weeks later, my brother was gone. He was shot and killed while on his way home from a movie date by a young man that he'd had an argument with. He dropped off his young lady and was headed home, but he never made it. A lot of lives changed that day. My brother lost his life. Our family lost a wonderful young man. Our community lost a promising black youth. And the young lady perhaps lost a dream of going to her senior dance with my handsome brother on her arm. I was an adult when this happened, so I've dealt with a lot of that pain. But many of our kids are facing a similar kind of pain every day, and while they're very young and they need our help, they need healing. I've worked with kids and youth for over 25 years as a youth counselor, tutor, mentor, after-school program director, summer camp director, you name it. Now, I'm a professor of juvenile justice, and my work really focuses on creating conditions in communities and schools that help young people thrive so they don't end up in the justice system. I've become very fascinated lately with restorative approaches as a way to support young people and communities. Restorative practices are a set of skills and processes grounded in values. And when we adopt these values and practices, they change the way we interact with one another. These approaches have been practiced by indigenous peoples in New Zealand, North America, and even parts of Africa as a way of life. When we adopt them, I think they have transformative potential. Schools around the world are using restorative approaches. In the United States, schools in Denver, Oakland, and here in Washington, D.C. are using these practices to help support youth and enable them to thrive. I'm convinced that we need a restorative revolution. I'd like to share with you today a few values that are core to restorative approaches: connection, care, and repair. Values that we can all buy into. Connection. Connection is really about relationships and preventing harm by focusing on our relatedness. We all exist within an intricate web of relationships with ourselves, with each other, and with the earth. When we focus on connection, we cultivate belonging. And when people have a sense of belonging, they're less likely to harm each other. And when they do, they're more invested in repairing that harm. Connection in schools looks like kids engaged in a mindfulness activity or a centering practice. It looks like a morning meeting where the school community gathers and they can share their recent victories or even things they're challenged with. It looks like the entire school community practicing empathy, patience, and compassion. Care. Care is about showing up. Care is about understanding that when we're in deep relationships, it's all of our job to make sure everyone is safe so we can all thrive. So it's about accepting the responsibility of creating real community. And when people are in conflict, care says we all play a role in helping them resolve that conflict. The Peace Circle process is one way of doing that. In the Peace Circle, we gather with our supporters, our family, our faith leaders, our teachers, principals, even social workers. We sit facing one another. Sometimes a centerpiece is in the middle of the circle. It could be a vase of flowers, photos of family members, or a ceremonial object. It helps us remember that we're connected to one another, that the circle is sacred, and so are we. The talking piece is passed around from person to person so that there's equity of voice, and we bear witness to one another's stories, and we work together to resolve problems. Often we find when we do peace circles with young people, they're in conflict, they're in crisis. They need our support. Families need our support, not our stigmatization. I wonder if Abdullah and this young man that killed him had an opportunity to sit in a peace circle, perhaps that situation would have resolved differently. Perhaps my brother would still be here. I also think about the rise in school shootings we've seen lately. And I wonder, had we created more connection and more care with students, between schools and families and communities and service providers, could we have saved more lives? We're fallible human beings. We hurt each other. That's why the value of repair is essential. Because it says that we understand healing is part of the process because recovery is the norm. Kids in our schools are being hurt every day because of their sex or gender identity, because they speak with an accent, because they're Muslim. We need to stop this hurting in schools and adopt restorative approaches to build real community. And there's something else happening in schools that really causes harm. And that's when we rely upon suspension and expulsion as a disciplinary measure. A suspension sends a message that you don't belong here. And we know in this field that just one suspension can increase a child's chances of dropping out of school altogether, which then makes them more vulnerable to justice system involvement, where we know youth of color are already overrepresented. In fact, there's one study that says preschool children, Black children make up about 17% of all the preschool enrollment in the country. Yet they comprise about 48% of preschool suspensions, almost half. Another study says that black girls are suspended at 7 times the rate of white girls in elementary school. And high school students, black students are suspended at twice the rate of their white peers. There are even studies that show that black children, for boys age 10, girls age 5, are perceived as being older, less innocent, and less in need of nurturing than their white peers. As a mother, auntie, godmother, and cousin to black children and youth, this hurts. Because it tells me that our hidden race and gender biases, probably more than kids' behavior, plays a role in determining who gets suspended from schools. And we've got to take responsibility for that. Fortunately, restorative approaches are helping us examine the discipline disparity in schools, because all children deserve to be equally valued, safe, and truly supported. It's been a while since my brother's death. I've thought about him countless times, wondering what kind of young man would he have become. Maybe an engineer, maybe an entrepreneur. Maybe he would have given me more nieces and nephews to love and buy gifts for. Surely he would have traveled the world. And yes, he would have seen Africa, because I would have taken him. I can't answer any of those questions, and I can't bring my brother back. But what I can do is help create spaces for healing for others. Here at my institution, I offer a weekly mindfulness session for faculty, students, and staff so we can come together in community and breathe and restore ourselves. My work with youth and communities also involves spoken word, mindfulness, restorative circles, poetry, to help us build community and heal. And I belong to a wonderful organization that promotes contemplative approaches in education, so that classrooms, even on the college level, can be spaces where students and faculty feel human. Dr. Fania Davis, a restorative justice pioneer, says that we need warriors and healers now, because ours is a system that hurts people who hurt people, to show that hurting people is wrong. I say, let's stop the hurting. I say, let's stop the harming, and let's begin the healing. The restorative revolution needs you. We need your energy. We need your gifts. What can you do? You can connect. Connect with yourself first. Figure out what it is that makes you feel whole and restored and nurtured. Gardening, painting, fishing, being in nature, singing. Whatever it is, do it on a regular basis. Many of us are exhausted and overworked. I know, I'm a teacher, which is even more reason why we need to tend to our own restoration. And then connect with others. Connect with young people. Connect with them in a deep and authentic way. My mother tried to teach all of the kids in our family how to crochet, girls and boys. And when she had them sitting next to her and they were working together and she was feeding them homemade baked goods, she'd say, "What's going on with you? How's school? Who's bothering you? What do you need from me?" Restorative approaches can look like families being present to and for one another. Deepen your care. Put yourself in places where you can really serve. Support organizations doing this work. Empower your school, your neighborhood school, your community center with restorative practices. Become trained to lead circles yourselves. And repair. Join us as we disrupt the narratives, policies, and practices that harm kids. Help us transform schools into places of equity and learning where everyone can thrive. We need you. We need you to do this work. We all need to be not just advocates for restorative approaches, but real models of restorative approaches. Join us. Let's be the restorative revolution so that we can work together to bring out the good, the better, and the absolute best in all of our children. Thank you.